So, in Amaravati right now, there is a construction worker who is digging a 6-foot pit in like 45-degree heat for maybe 600 rupees a day.
Right.
And meanwhile, in some air-conditioned boardroom, a tech platform's legal team has exactly 3 hours to decide if a comedian's post violates national security.
Yeah, the contrast it's pretty stark.
It really is. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are acting as your virtual UPSC mentor, your current affairs guide, and we are breaking down a massive stack of 20 crucial updates today. We're covering polity, economy, environment, and global affairs.
And honestly, if you look at these updates from climate stress to digital censorship to geopolitical breakups, there is a massive through line here.
Right, the state machinery.
Exactly. The overarching theme is how the state constantly calibrates its regulatory power. It's balancing economic growth, individual rights, and volatile global uncertainties.
And whether you are prepping for an exam, getting ready for a major meeting, or just trying to understand the world a bit better, our mission today is to connect these dots for you. So let's just jump into how the state is managing this digital fallout.
Let's do it.
There's this recent report. It's titled Far from a Safe Harbor, and it details the escalating use of the IT rules to monitor the internet. The government is leaning really heavily on Section 69A of the IT Act.
Which is the power to block public access to info for national security, right?
Exactly. And alongside that, Section 793B, to mandate social media takedowns. And we're seeing this deployed against critics, independent media outlets. The whole mechanism hinges on this safe harbor provision.
Right.
And from my understanding, it's basically a landlord-tenant dynamic. The tech platforms are the landlords, and they aren't legally liable for the illegal activities of the tenants, the users, as long as they evict the user the moment the authorities serve a notice.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. But the structural shift we're seeing right now is the timeline of that eviction notice.
Right, because it changed, didn't it?
It did. An amendment to the IT rules actually reduced the compliance window for taking down unlawful content. It went from 36 hours down to just 3 hours.
Wow, 3 hours.
Yeah. And the Ministry of Electronics and IT argues this is a necessary defense mechanism. I mean, think about deep fakes, AI-generated misinformation, coordinated bot campaigns.
They move incredibly fast.
Exactly. They can cause catastrophic social damage in a matter of hours. You know the saying, a lie travels globally before the truth is even drafted.
But, I mean, the infrastructure of free speech is fundamentally altered by that deadline, isn't it? If a tech platform only has 3 hours to process a really complex legal or political claim, they just don't have time to conduct a thorough constitutional review.
No, they don't.
They are heavily incentivized to just automate the takedown, just to protect their own safe harbor status and avoid liability.
And that is the exact core concern of civil rights advocates right there. When the state tightens that timeline, the tech platforms basically become de facto censors out of pure self-preservation.
Right, creates a chilling effect.
Because the threshold for removing a citizen's speech drops significantly.
Yeah.
The risk of leaving it up is just too high for the platform.
Yeah. And, we see a very similar tension regarding the boundaries of personal data and the legal system, specifically with the Right to Information Act, or RTI.
Oh, the Delhi High Court ruling.
Yes. So a recent Delhi High Court ruling determined that a man's net taxable income details were exempt from disclosure to his estranged wife.
Even though the Central Information Commission had originally ordered the disclosure, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because the wife was seeking maintenance and needed to establish his actual wealth. And honestly, if the justice system relies on transparency, allowing a spouse to hide their income behind privacy laws seems to subvert the entire concept of fair maintenance.
I see where you're coming from.
I mean, a matrimonial dispute surely carries enough public interest to warrant transparency.
Well, see, the legal mechanism of the RTI Act wasn't really designed for private discovery. The High Court drew a firm line here. They stated that the RTI Act exists to promote transparency and the functioning of public authorities.
So holding the government accountable to the taxpayer.
Exactly. Income tax returns are inherently personal information that the state holds in its fiduciary capacity. So expanding the RTI to settle private marital disputes, well, it would weaponize the transparency law into a tool for personal surveillance.
Ah, I see.
But, and this is important, the court didn't just leave the spouse without a remedy. They pointed directly to the Supreme Court's ruling in Rajneesh v. Neha.
Oh, right. That ruling requires parties in maintenance proceedings to file detailed affidavits disclosing their income, their assets, liabilities, all directly to the family court.
Exactly. It forces transparency, but through the correct judicial channel. The family court has the jurisdiction to evaluate those affidavits and, penalize perjury. The High Court is basically saying, yes, the state holds your data, but it won't act as a clearinghouse for it outside of appropriate legal mechanisms.
That makes sense. The courts are frequently acting as that boundary setter. We saw the Supreme Court step in regarding anticipatory bail and Article 21 of the Constitution recently, too.
Yes, the Poon-Kara case.
Right. They granted anticipatory bail to the Congress leader in a criminal defamation and forgery case. This was filed by the Assam chief minister's wife. Now, without getting into the political crossfire at all.
Right, keeping it strictly to the jurisprudence.
Exactly. What stands out is how the bench, headed by Justice J.K. Maheshwari, handled this. They explicitly cautioned the state machinery against using criminal processes and custodial interrogation for political rivalry.
Yeah, they emphasize that curtailing personal liberty under Article 21 requires a significantly higher threshold than retaliatory allegations.
Right.
The Supreme Court is defining the limits of state power by reinforcing that the criminal justice system has to remain objective. If the police machinery is perceived as a tool for harassment rather than justice, the foundational trust in the state's authority just erodes.
Yeah, it maintains that friction required in a democracy.
It's exactly between the investigating agencies and the constitutional rights of the individual.
Speaking of defining individuals, the state is doing that at the level of basic citizenship, too.
The OCI digitization.
Yeah. The 2009 citizenship rules were just amended to digitize the Overseas Citizen of India process, but they slipped in a very specific proviso. Minor children cannot hold the passport of any other country while simultaneously holding an Indian passport.
That is an absolute tightening of dual citizenship boundaries.
It really is. And meanwhile, on a broader internal security level, the state is trying to define boundaries with armed groups.
In Manipur,
Yes. Peace talks have officially resumed between the center, the state government, and Kuki-Zo insurgent groups under a suspension of operations Pact.
which is the first dialogue since the elected state government was restored in February, right?
Exactly.
Whether the state is clarifying the nationality of a minor on a digital portal or negotiating a ceasefire with an insurgent group, it's fundamentally setting the rules of engagement.
It's managing its population.
Yeah. And you can see that exact same impulse to govern and stabilize carrying over into how it manages the macroeconomic engine.
Well, let's trace that into the economy then, because the internal metrics there are telling a fascinating story.
Oh, the GST numbers.
Yeah. April 2026 saw a record-breaking GST collection of 2.43 lakh crore rupees.
That's massive.
It's an 8.7% jump from the previous year, so on paper that looks like a booming economic engine. But when you look at the source of that revenue, gross collections from imports grew by nearly 26%,
Right.
while collections from domestic sales only grew by 4.3%. So if our revenue growth is massively dependent on imports while domestic consumption is sluggish, that signals a cooling in everyday discretionary spending.
It absolutely points to a softness in the domestic market.
Right.
It's likely driven by inflation and tightened household budgets.
Right.
The broader macroeconomic engine is running, sure, but the internal gears are experiencing a lot of friction. And to manage that kind of potential turbulence, the regulatory bodies have to anticipate risks before they materialize.
Which brings us to the RBI.
Exactly. This is why the Reserve Bank of India is transitioning the banking sector to the expected credit loss, or ECL, framework for classifying bad loans.
Okay, so tell me if this analogy works. It seems to me this ECL framework is essentially making banks act like meteorologists.
Okay, how so?
Like they have to provision for the hurricane while the sun is still shining rather than just looking out the window to see if it's already raining.
Yes, that forward-looking mandate is exactly the point. But the friction comes from the cost of that radar equipment, so to speak.
Right.
The old incurred loss model allowed banks to wait until a default actually happened before they classified the loan as bad and made financial provisions.
Which seems risky.
Very. So the new ECL framework, which aligns with the global IFRS 9 standard, it forces them to classify non-performing assets into 3 risk stages.
What are the stages?
Stage 1 involves estimating losses over a 12-month period for low-risk loans. Stages 2 and 3 require recognizing lifetime expected credit losses for significant and high-risk loans.
Oh, wow. So they have to lock up capital way in advance.
Exactly. They are forced to lock up capital to build a financial umbrella. It creates a short-term cost impact on their balance sheets, obviously, but it severely limits the risk of systemic contagion if an entire sector suddenly defaults.
That theme of building systemic resilience is really visible right now. We see it in the manufacturing sector, too. The Department of Commerce and Pharmaxil are executing a massive assessment of the pharmaceutical and medical device supply chain.
Auditing the capacity and risks.
Yeah. Post-COVID, the reliance on imported active pharmaceutical ingredients is recognized as just a glaring vulnerability.
You can't successfully push the government's production-linked incentive schemes to boost domestic manufacturing if you don't intimately understand the choke points in your own supply chain.
Exactly.
But, fixing the supply chain of goods is often easier than fixing the structural inequalities in the workforce that actually produces them.
That is very true. And the National Stock Exchange data on women in the formal workforce just came out.
And it's pretty concerning.
It reveals a severe failure in the formalization of labor. 48% of listed firms have 0 women as key managers. 0.
And even when women do secure regular wage jobs, the wage gap remains incredibly stark.
Yeah, they earn roughly 5,600 rupees less per month on average than men. We have these new labor codes designed to mandate pay parity, but the translation from statutory policy to corporate practice is just heavily stalled.
Right. Women represent only 24% of regular wage employees, and 57% of those women are working without a written job contract.
It's a deep structural vulnerability, but what's compelling is that we're actually seeing an unprecedented safety net being tested in the informal digital sector.
In Karnataka.
Yes. Karnataka has launched the first of its kind grievance portal, the IPGRS. It's designed specifically for platform-based gig workers.
Which is huge because historically the gig economy has exploited this legal gray area where workers are just classified as independent contractors.
Right, with 0 benefits. But under this new Karnataka Platform-Based Gig Workers Act, tech aggregators are legally forced to constitute an internal dispute resolution committee.
So how does the portal work?
If a delivery partner has an algorithmic pay deduction or an unpaid termination, they log it on this state-monitored portal. It automatically routes to the aggregator, who then has to resolve it within a strict time frame.
That is fascinating. The state is finally acting as the monitor. They're inserting a layer of structural transparency right into the algorithms.
Exactly.
It represents the state acknowledging that the nature of employment has permanently shifted.
Yeah.
The social contract has to evolve beyond the traditional factory floor model, It has to protect a highly decentralized algorithmic workforce.
But while gig workers are fighting algorithmic battles, the traditional informal labor sector is facing a physical, devastating environmental reality right now.
The heat waves.
Yes. The heatwave data changes the economic equation of daily wage labor entirely. Like we mentioned at the start, we have construction workers in Amaravati doing heavy manual labor in 45-degree heat for 600 rupees a day.
That's brutal.
And we have agricultural laborers facing severe health declines in the fields, but they continue working because their MG and GA payments are delayed.
Right. They can't afford to stop.
The Andhra Pradesh State Disaster Management Authority has a heatwave action plan. It recommends no outdoor work between noon and 3 p.m.
But a directive like that is completely disconnected from the economic reality of a daily wage worker.
Exactly. Taking a 3-hour break means taking a massive pay cut that they literally cannot survive.
And this is why the climate crisis has ceased to be just an abstract environmental model. It is a daily physical threat to labor productivity. The heat stress degrades the physical capacity of the workforce, and that translates into a direct macroeconomic drain.
And it strains the infrastructure, too.
Unbelievably so. The combination of the heat waves and El Niño conditions is driving up peak power demand across the whole country. The grid is under immense strain. It's forcing the state to rely heavily on maximum coal output alongside solar generation just to prevent blackouts.
Which is wild because simultaneously we are seeing a massive capital deployed to transition away from fossil fuels.
Like the PME drive scheme?
Exactly. They have successfully tendered 14,000 electric buses to states through Convergence Energy Services Limited. That is a 4,391 crore rupee intervention just to decarbonize urban public transport.
The procurement is impressive, sure, but absorbing a fleet of 14,000 electric buses introduces immense logistical friction for municipal governments.
How so?
Well, you have to overhaul route planning based on battery range, and more critically, you have to build out high-capacity charging depot infrastructure without collapsing the local distribution grids we just talked about.
Right. The grids are already stressed by the heat. And, that tension between environmental imperatives and urban infrastructure is playing out really vividly at the KBR National Park in Hyderabad.
Oh, the eco-sensitive zone debate.
Yeah. So an eco-sensitive zone, or ESZ, is designed to act as a buffer around protected areas to minimize human impact. A 2023 Supreme Court ruling mandates a default 1-kilometer ESZ,
Right.
but the government is currently pushing to shrink the ESZ around KBR Park from 1 kilometer down to a razor-thin margin varying between just 3 and 29.8 meters.
3 meters. That's practically nothing.
I know, and the justification is the construction of 6 flyovers under the Strategic Road Development Plan. It is a direct collision between ecological preservation and the relentless demand for traffic management in a developing urban core.
It forces a brutal calculation of survival metrics, and we actually see those survival metrics most clearly in the overall health data of the population.
The new NSO survey.
Yes. The 80th NSO survey tracking out-of-pocket expenses, or OPE, for healthcare, it reveals a really complex picture. The data shows the mean out-of-pocket expense has roughly doubled.
Which reflects the rising baseline cost of medical care.
Exactly. However, the median expense has actually dropped to 11,285 rupees. And this drop in the median is largely attributed to the expansion of the Ayushman Bharat PMJAY scheme, which broadened insurance coverage for lower-income deciles.
Okay, I have to interject there, because if the median expense is dropping and insurance coverage is expanding, it contradicts the ongoing reality that healthcare costs remain one of the primary drivers pushing families into poverty in this country.
It sounds counterintuitive, I know.
Right. A drop in the median doesn't seem to correlate with actual financial security for the patient.
Well, that contradiction exists because of the specific design of the safety net. See, the PMJAY scheme is highly effective at covering catastrophic hospitalizations, the massive acute medical events.
Okay.
When those enormous bills are covered by the state, it pulls the median down statistically.
Ah, I see.
However, the reimbursement rates provided to private hospitals under the scheme are notoriously low. So hospitals often compensate by pushing hidden costs onto the patient. Diagnostics, consumables, ancillary services, things not covered by the package.
Right, so the patient still pays out of pocket.
Exactly. And more importantly, the scheme focuses heavily on hospitalization. Meanwhile, the day-in, day-out management of chronic, non-communicable diseases remains severely underfunded in the public sector.
So patients are forced into the private market for routine care?
Yes, and that slowly drains their savings over time. The safety net catches you if you fall off a cliff, but it doesn't stop you from slowly sinking.
That is a heavy realization. And, all of these domestic calculations, our healthcare funding, our infrastructure projects, our inflation rates, they are entirely at the mercy of global geopolitical currents.
Absolutely.
The massive structural shift happening in the global energy market right now. The UAE is officially exiting OPEC on May 1st.
This is huge news.
It is. OPEC has historically acted as this massive dam, with Saudi Arabia controlling the spillway to keep the global oil supply tight and prices artificially high.
Right.
But the UAE basically just decided they have too much water sitting in their reservoir and they're building their own river.
Yeah.
They're bypassing the cartel's dam entirely. It's like a star athlete quitting a championship team simply because the coach won't give them enough playing time.
That is a perfect way to put it. The UAE exiting OPEC isn't just a disagreement over quotas. It's a massive signal that the era of petrostate cartels is fracturing.
Because the window to sell fossil fuels is definitively closing.
Exactly. The UAE has the world's 6th largest oil reserves, but OPEC capped their production quota at 3.45 million barrels per day.
Wow.
But the UAE has executed a $150 billion investment plan to increase their capacity to 5 million barrels per day.
Wow.
They realize the global green transition makes their assets a ticking clock. It is a race to monetize their oil before it becomes a stranded asset.
So they're prioritizing their national economic maximization over the cartel's collective price-fixing strategy.
Precisely.
Well, for a country like India, which is the world's 3rd largest crude importer, watching a 60-year monopoly lose its grip is a strategic advantage, right?
Oh, absolutely.
With the UAE operating outside of OPEC's production cuts, they have to aggressively compete for Asian market share. India can leverage this newly unlocked spare capacity to negotiate better long-term pricing.
Which mitigates the imported inflation that was being artificially propped up by the cartel.
Exactly.
It definitely creates a buyer's market. But we have to remember, the broader Middle Eastern theater remains a high-wire act. It's a mix of dual-track diplomacy and existential security threats.
Like the U.S.-Iran conflict?
Exactly.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have back-channel diplomacy actively running. Iran recently submitted a new proposal for talks with the U.S. using Pakistan as a mediator.
Right.
But simultaneously, Iran's Revolutionary Guards are publicly warning that American warships will burn if Iranian territory is attacked. It is the grim reality of modern geopolitics. You are negotiating trade and ceasefires under the active threat of ballistic missiles.
Yeah. And we see that dual requirement of diplomacy and hard security right in our own region, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
The diplomatic back channels are ensuring India's commitment to normalizing ties with Bangladesh remains intact, which is obviously vital for the stability of our eastern flank.
Right.
But diplomacy has to be backed by force projection. The integration of the Project 17A stealth frigates into the naval fleet continues, and the 6th frigate was recently launched.
Those platforms vastly upgrade our anti-surface and anti-submarine warfare capabilities, especially in the increasingly contested Indian Ocean region.
Right, because the state must project power externally to secure its maritime trade routes, while also maintaining absolute vigilance internally against transnational threats.
Transnational threats that exploit globalized networks.
Which brings us to our final piece of the puzzle today, a massive internal security operation by the Narcotics Control Bureau in Mumbai. They cracked an international narcotics ring, seizing 349 kilograms of high-grade South American cocaine.
That is a staggering amount.
The street value is estimated at 1,745 crore rupees. It is a stark reminder of the illicit economies operating perfectly parallel to all the formal systems we've been discussing today.
It really is. You know, when you synthesize all these updates, the sheer velocity of change is striking. The state is in a perpetual race to adapt.
It really is.
It is updating IT laws to govern an algorithmic public square. It's restructuring the banking sector's risk models to weather global financial shocks. And it's attempting to protect an informal workforce from unprecedented environmental realities.
It is a profoundly interconnected ecosystem.
Completely.
The UAE's oil strategy dictates the cost of shipping those electric buses. The climate anomalies straining the power grid dictate the viability of the gig worker's daily wage. We've seen today how the architecture of our society is being rewritten, from citizenship rules and social safety nets to the very limits of free speech. And as the government digitizes its oversight and tech aggregators control vast swaths of our economic lives, we really have to ask who ultimately holds the safe harbor for your personal autonomy.
It's the critical question.
Are we the architects of our own digital and economic realities, or are we simply operating on a platform with a 3-hour eviction notice? Something for you to mull over. Until next time, keep questioning the underlying mechanisms of what you read.